There's a sound I still hear when everything goes quiet, like something small giving up under pressure. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Most people wouldn't even notice it, but I do. Every night, if I let my mind drift too far, it comes back. I remember the way the air felt that night, heavy, like it was holding its breath. I wasn't supposed to be there, or maybe I was. That's the part I keep arguing with myself about. Because if I hadn't been standing exactly where I was, if I had just walked away a few seconds earlier, then I wouldn't have seen it. And if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have had to make a choice. It wasn't a big moment. That's the lie people believe, that life-changing decisions arrive with noise, urgency, something undeniable. This didn't. It slipped in quietly, almost politely, like it didn't want to disturb anything. I saw what happened. I understood it immediately. And then, I did nothing. That's the part no one knows. That's the part that never stopped growing. I was 29 that year, and I had just started getting used to the idea that my life might finally stay still for a while. Not perfect, nothing like that, but stable enough to breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. I had a small apartment above a closed tailor shop, the kind that still had faded measurements scribbled on the walls behind the curtains. The rent was cheap because the plumbing groaned like it was in pain, but I didn't mind. It felt like a place where nothing important could happen. That's probably why I didn't expect that night to follow me. It was late, past midnight, closer to 1, I think. I remember because I had been sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, debating whether or not to call her. My younger sister. We hadn't spoken properly in weeks. Not after the last argument. It wasn't even about anything serious. Just one of those small, sharp conversations that leaves a mark deeper than it should. I kept telling myself I'd call her the next day. I always did. That night, I didn't call. Instead, I stepped outside. There was a cigarette between my fingers, though I'd promised myself I was quitting. I told myself it was just for the cold air, just to clear my head. The street was quiet in that unnatural way. No distant traffic, no voices, not even the hum of a late-night generator. Just stillness. The kind that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. I leaned against the railing just outside the stairwell, looking down at the narrow alley that ran alongside the building. It wasn't much to look at. Cracked pavement, a flickering light near the dumpster, and shadows that seemed thicker than usual. I'd seen it 100 times before. Nothing new. But that night, something shifted. At first, it was just movement. A shape where there shouldn't have been one. I remember narrowing my eyes, trying to make sense of it, thinking maybe it was a stray dog or someone passing through. People cut through that alley sometimes. It wasn't unusual. Then I heard voices. Low. Urgent. Not loud enough to understand right away, but enough to tell they weren't casual. There was tension in the way the words came out. Tight, controlled, like something was being forced to stay quiet. I held my breath without realizing it, the cigarette burning slowly between my fingers as I leaned a little further over the railing. There were 2 of them. One closer to the light, the other mostly hidden in shadow. I could only see pieces, an arm, the edge of a jacket, The way one of them kept shifting his weight like he couldn't stand still. The flickering bulb above them made everything feel broken, like I was watching fragments instead of a whole picture. I told myself to go back inside. It wasn't my business. That thought came quickly, almost automatically. I'd lived long enough to know when to stay out of things. Nothing good ever came from getting involved in situations you didn't understand. That's what I believed. That's what I had learned. But I didn't move. Something in the way one of them spoke, sharper now, louder for a second before dropping again, pulled me in. I caught a few words then. Not enough to form a full sentence, just pieces. You said, "Not here, too late." My grip tightened on the railing. There was a pause after that. A heavy one. The kind that feels like it's building towards something, even if you don't know what yet. The man in the light took a step back, his face briefly visible. I didn't recognize him. Mid-30s, maybe. Tired eyes. The kind of face you forget easily. The other one stayed in shadow. That's what I remember most clearly. I couldn't see his face at all. Just the outline of him. Still. Watching. Waiting. And then it happened. Not fast. Not the way you'd expect. There was no sudden explosion of movement. No shouting. No dramatic struggle. Just a shift. A small, deliberate motion that felt almost practiced. The man in the light stiffened, like he realized something a second too late. His hands came up, not to fight, just instinctively, like he didn't understand what was happening yet. I remember thinking, this is wrong. I remember knowing, in that exact second, that I was watching something I shouldn't be. And still, I didn't move. The sound came then. That small, final sound. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It barely seemed to exist at all, except that it did. The man in the light made a noise, more breath than voice, and then his body just folded. Not dramatically, not violently, just collapsed in on itself like something had been turned off inside him. I froze. Every part of me locked in place. The cigarette slipped from my fingers, but I didn't notice. My eyes were fixed on the alley, on the shape now lying too still on the ground. My brain was trying to catch up, trying to put meaning to what I had just seen, but it felt slow, delayed, like it didn't want to fully understand. The figure in the shadows stepped forward, just enough for the light to touch the edge of his face. And for a second, a single, clear second, I saw him. Not well enough to describe every detail, but enough. Enough to recognize him. That's when everything inside me shifted. Because this wasn't random anymore. This wasn't just something I had accidentally witnessed. This was someone I knew. Not closely. Not someone important in my life. But familiar. The kind of familiar that roots you in place because it makes everything more real, more dangerous. My mind scrambled for context, for memory. Where had I seen him before? Why did his face feel so immediate, so wrong in that moment? He looked up. Not directly at me. Not quite. But close enough that I felt it. That sudden, sharp awareness that if I moved, even slightly, I might be seen. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. I stepped back from the railing, pressing myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might give me away. This is where you do something. That thought came in fast, panicked. Call someone. Shout. Run downstairs. Anything. But instead, I stood there, in the dark, barely breathing. Because another thought came right after. If he sees you, you're part of this. I don't know where that came from. Fear. Probably. The kind that doesn't ask permission, doesn't wait for logic. It just settles in and takes control. I imagined his eyes finding mine, imagined the recognition going both ways, imagined what that would mean. So I stayed still, silent. In the alley, there was movement again. Subtle, controlled. The man, no, not just a man anymore, something else now, looked down at the body for a moment. No panic, no hesitation, just confirmation. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No rush, no backward glance. He disappeared into the darkness at the far end of the alley, and within seconds, it was like he had never been there at all, except for what he left behind. I stayed where I was for a long time after that. I don't know how long exactly. Minutes, maybe more. My legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me anymore. My mind kept replaying those few seconds over and over, trying to find a version of them where I had done something different. There wasn't one. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Slowly, carefully, I stepped back toward the railing. The alley looked the same as it always had. Quiet, empty, except it wasn't. The body was still there, unmoving, real. And that's when the weight of it finally settled in. I had seen everything. I knew what had happened. I knew who had done it. And I was the only one standing there. All I had to do was speak. But even then, even with that thought pressing hard against my chest, I hesitated. Because somewhere, deep down, something had already started to take hold. Something quiet. Something that sounded a lot like a reason to stay silent. I don't remember going back inside. One moment I was staring down at the alley, and the next I was sitting on the edge of my bed again, my hands resting on my knees like I had just finished something routine. But nothing felt routine. My ears were ringing. My throat was dry. There was this strange pressure behind my eyes, like my body was waiting for me to react, and I just wasn't. I kept telling myself to stand up, to grab my phone, to call someone, anyone. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there and listened to the silence, the same silence that had wrapped itself around that alley. It felt thicker now, like it had followed me inside, like it was sitting in the room with me. Every second that passed made it harder to move, not easier. Like I was sinking into something. I tried to think logically. You don't know what you saw. Maybe he's not dead. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But those thoughts didn't last. They couldn't. Because I had seen his face. Not just the one on the ground, but the other one too. The one who walked away. And that changed everything. I stood up eventually, but not to help. I went to the sink, turned the tap on, let the water run longer than it needed to. I remember staring at my reflection in the small, scratched mirror above it. My face looked normal. That's what bothered me the most. Nothing about me showed what I had just witnessed. No sign that something irreversible had just happened a few meters away. I splashed water on my face anyway, as if that might reset something. It didn't. When I finally picked up my phone, my hand was steady. That's another thing I've thought about too many times. It should have been shaking. I should have been panicking. But I wasn't. I was calm in a way that felt wrong. I unlocked the screen. And then I just stared at it. Who do you call first? The police. What do you even say? I saw something. I think someone's hurt. I know who did it. That last one stuck. Because saying that out loud would make it real in a way I couldn't take back. It would pull me into it, drag me out of the safety of being just a witness and into something else entirely. A participant. A name on a report. A person who would have to answer questions, stand in rooms, point at someone and say, "It was him." My thumb hovered over the screen. And then another thought came in. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet and convincing. What if you're wrong? It slipped in so easily. What if it wasn't him? What if you didn't see clearly? What if you get involved in something you can't control? I sat back down. The phone stayed in my hand, but my grip loosened, like I was already letting go of the idea. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time didn't feel the same anymore. It stretched, blurred. I kept listening for something. Sirens, voices, anything that would suggest someone else had noticed. But there was nothing. Just that same suffocating quiet. Eventually, I stood up again and walked to the window. Not the one facing the alley. I avoided that, but the one on the other side of the room, the one that looked out onto the empty street. Everything there was untouched. A parked car. A closed shop. A flickering street light further down. Normal. Completely, painfully normal. I told myself something then. If someone else finds him, if someone else calls it in, then I'll speak. That was the deal I made. A small one. A temporary one. Just wait. Just don't be the first. It sounded reasonable in my head. Safe. Like I wasn't really choosing silence, just delaying action. giving things time to unfold on their own. So I waited. I don't know how long it took. Maybe half an hour. Maybe more. But eventually, the silence broke. Distant at first. Then closer. A car door. Voices. The faint crackle of a radio. I moved back to the alley window before I could stop myself. Slowly, carefully, I leaned just enough to see without exposing too much of myself. There were two men down there now. Not the same ones. These were different. One of them crouched beside the body, the other pacing slightly, already on the phone. Even from above, I could see the shift in their posture, the recognition that something was very wrong. I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief. It hit me unexpectedly, sharp and immediate. Someone else had found him. Someone else had made the call. It wasn't just mine to carry anymore. I stepped back from the window again, my heart slowing for the first time since it all started. The urgency that had been pressing on me began to fade, replaced by something quieter. Something easier to live with. You don't need to rush now. That's what I told myself. They're already handling it. You can still come forward, later. But later is a dangerous word. It stretches. It bends. It gives you room to move things further and further away from the moment where they matter most. I sat back down on the bed, the phone still in my hand, but now it felt heavier. Not urgent anymore, just there. A choice I could make whenever I was ready. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. The sirens came after that. Loud, cutting through the night in a way that made everything feel more official, more real. Red and blue lights spilled into the edges of my room, flickering against the walls like a warning I wasn't sure I deserved. I didn't go back to the window. I didn't want to see it again. Didn't want to risk catching another glimpse of something I couldn't unsee. Instead, I lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, listening as more voices filled the alley. Commands. Questions. Movement. The world responding to what had happened. Without me. That thought should have bothered me more than it did. But instead, I felt myself drifting into a strange kind of calm. Not peace. Not relief exactly. Just distance. Like I had stepped slightly outside of the situation, enough to convince myself that I wasn't as involved as I actually was. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Just to escape the noise. And that's when his face came back. Not the one on the ground. The other one. The one who had looked up, just enough. The one I recognized. The memory sharpened now, clearer than before. My brain filling in details it had held back at first. The line of his jaw. The way he moved. The familiarity that had felt distant before now settling into something undeniable. I knew exactly where I'd seen him. And that realization didn't bring clarity. It brought something worse. Because now, staying silent wasn't just about fear. It was about choice. a deliberate one. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise outside, with the siren still echoing through the night, I made it. Not out loud, not in words, but in the quiet way. I put my phone down on the table beside me and didn't pick it back up. That was the moment. Not when I saw it, not when it happened, but right there, when I chose not to speak, even though I could, even though I knew exactly what it would mean if I didn't. Part 3. Morning didn't feel like morning. The light came in the same way it always did, thin, pale, slipping through the edges of the curtain, but it didn't bring any sense of reset. It just exposed everything more clearly. The room, the bed, the phone still sitting where I left it, and the quiet, still there, like it had settled in overnight and decided not to leave. For a few seconds after I opened my eyes, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened, that it was something I had imagined. A bad dream, maybe. But then I heard movement outside. Not the distant, normal kind, something closer. Heavier. Voices again. Different from the night before. Slower. More controlled. Official. And it all came back at once. I didn't get up right away. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling that same pressure building again. Except now it wasn't sharp or panicked. It was dull. Constant. Like something had settled into my chest and wasn't planning to move. Eventually, I forced myself up. Each step felt deliberate, like I had to think about it before doing it. I avoided the alley window again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I didn't look, it would stay distant. Less real. But sound carries. And I heard enough. A voice asking questions. Another answering. Fragments drifting up through the open space like pieces of a conversation I wasn't supposed to be part of, but was. Around midnight. No witnesses yet. Nothing clear. That last part stayed with me. No witnesses yet. I stood still when I heard it. My body reacting before my mind did. Because I knew that wasn't true. There was a witness. Me. And for the first time since the night before, something sharper cut through that layer of distance I'd been hiding in. They don't know. That realization didn't feel like relief this time. It felt like a weight. I moved toward the window before I could stop myself. Slowly, carefully, like I was approaching something that might react if I got too close. When I finally looked down, the alley had changed. Not completely, but enough. There was tape now. Yellow, stretched across the entrance like a line that separated what had happened from everything else. 2 officers stood near it, talking quietly. Another crouched near the same spot, though the body was gone. Gone. That hit harder than I expected, because now all that was left was the idea of it. The memory. And me. I watched for a few seconds longer than I should have, then stepped back again. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear exactly, but from something closer to pressure. like time was starting to move again, and I was being pulled with it whether I wanted to or not. This is when you go down there. That thought came in clearly. This is when you say something. But even then, even standing there, fully aware, fully capable, I hesitated. Because another memory surfaced. Not from the night before. Older. The first time I had seen him. It came back in pieces at first. A place. A voice. A brief interaction that hadn't meant anything at the time. But now, with everything sharpened, it locked into place. He used to come into the shop downstairs. Not often. Just occasionally. Always quiet. Always polite. The kind of person you don't think twice about. I had passed him on the stairs once, maybe twice. A nod. Nothing more. That was it. That was the connection. Small. Insignificant. Except it wasn't anymore. Because now it meant if I spoke, I wouldn't just be describing a stranger. I would be pointing to someone who had been close enough to recognize me too. And suddenly, the fear shifted. It wasn't just about being involved. It was about being seen. I stepped away from the window again, pacing the small space of my apartment like movement might help me think clearer. But it didn't. It just made everything louder inside my head. Say something now. Before it's too late. But too late for what? The man in the alley was already gone. Nothing I said would change that. That's the lie I leaned on. That's the one that made it easier to breathe. By the time I left the apartment, the scene had quieted down. The tape was still there, but fewer people. Less urgency. Like the moment had already started to fade for everyone else. I kept my head down as I walked past. Didn't slow. Didn't look. Just another person passing by. That's how I wanted it to feel. Normal. Disconnected. But it wasn't. Because every step I took away from that alley felt like I was carrying something with me. Something unfinished. Days passed. Then weeks. Life didn't stop. That's the strangest part. Things continued the way they always do. Work. Conversations. Small routines that don't care what you've seen or what you've done. People laughed. Complained. Made plans. The world moved forward like nothing had shifted. But I didn't. Not really. Because the silence didn't stay quiet. It started to grow. At first, it was just thoughts. What if they never find him? What if no one ever knows? Then it changed. News spread slowly. Not headlines. Not anything big. Just local talk. A man found in an alley. No clear suspect. No witnesses. No witnesses. Every time I heard that, it felt heavier. Because I knew that wasn't true. And then came the part one didn't expect. The consequences. Not immediate. Not obvious. But they came. I heard about his family first. A sister, I think, or maybe a wife. The details were never fully clear, just fragments passed around in conversations I pretended not to listen to. But the tone changed when people spoke about it. Less curiosity, more weight. Someone waiting for answers. Someone not getting them. And every time, there was this quiet space where something should have been filled in, but wasn't. Because of me. Then, months later, I saw him again. Not in the alley, not in the dark, but in daylight. Walking, alive, untouched. That's when it all came crashing back in a way it hadn't before. Because it wasn't just about what had happened anymore. It was about what hadn't. No consequences. No accountability. Just continuation. And I realized something then. My silence hadn't frozen that moment in time. It had allowed everything after it to keep moving. Him. The people connected to him. The damage that didn't stop in that alley. It spread. Quietly. The same way my silence did. I started seeing it everywhere after that. In the way I avoided certain streets. In the way I hesitated before speaking, even about small things. In the way that one choice, that single moment of doing nothing, had rewired something inside me. It wasn't just about that night anymore. It was about who I became because of it. Someone who knew the truth and chose not to carry it out loud. That's the part no one prepares you for. Not the fear, not the guilt, but the slow realization that silence doesn't end anything. It just moves the damage somewhere else. And sometimes, it keeps it alive. If I had spoken that night, maybe things would have been different. Maybe not. I'll never know. But I do know this, the worst part wasn't what I saw. It wasn't even what happened. It was the space I left behind afterward. The gap where truth should have been. Because that space didn't stay empty. It filled with consequences. For him. For them. For me. And it never really stopped growing. That's what silence does. It doesn't erase the moment. It makes sure it follows you into everything that comes after.